Hi, this is Dr. Maupin with WellMed. I am one of the doctors at Pediatrics at Barlight 201 here in San Antonio, and we're just going to be talking about nutrition today.
And I'm Lorena Kaplan. I'm one of our H-E-B Registered Dietitians. I work with our community in San Antonio. I'm also a sales marketing representative for H-E-B Nutrition Services.
So I just wanted to start off, we have so many things that we like to talk to parents about nutrition about, and it's just such a broad topic. And, you know, when we are dealing with kids, we're dealing everything from infancy up until almost adulthood. So there's such a wide variety. But what I feel like what I mostly talk to parents about is drinking. What should my kids drink? And I feel like I'm having that conversation. I know I had that conversation at least 3 times today. And so really, I'd like to go over what, especially I feel like the toddler years is where it really starts and what the kids are starting to drink. So really, what should kids be drinking? What recommendations can I give to parents and that kind of thing?
Yeah, absolutely. So as a dietitian, there's 2 drinks that I always recommend that everybody has is water and milk, right? And those are 2 really important nutrients that we need on a day-to-day. But to take a look at the way that people are drinking lots of sugary drinks today and the way the families are bringing those into their meals, I think it needs to start from the very beginning of what does balanced eating look like. And so we use what's called the USDA My Plate to teach families how to really incorporate all the parts of these plates to get good nutrition for their family. And so I'll keep on referencing the My Plate, but really taking a look at what the diet looks like first is really important to our dietitians. So at H-E-B Nutrition Services, our assessment of these families and their practices is so important to us to give them the best recommendations. But dairy and water are always going to be top of mind. But we understand there are times when maybe we want a little bit more flavor in our drinks. It's something that even within the Latino culture, aguas frescas and bringing in these drinks that are very cultural to us. We talk about how to replace those and also making sure that parents understand what they're getting into their bodies or putting into the kids' bodies in terms of sugar, in terms of carbs. We start using these languages and these words that they become familiar with. And so, we really want to make sure that we look at the family as a whole, the patient as a whole, and see what those cultural choices are that they are making. And then we try to ease in, all right, so if we're trying to bring in these flavors that kiddos want, how do we bring in other parts of what we know in the My Plate fruits and vegetables that we know also provide hydration, and we're still making these families smile and say, oh, this does taste good. Yeah. So water and dairy, the top 2 that we talk about, and we also talk about portion sizing and the needed dairy. And then we like to, like I mentioned, go into fruits and vegetables, but we also talk about what types of sweeteners is okay for a child to have. We talk about ways to flavor their drinks in not using artificial sugars, using some natural sugars, perhaps a little bit of juice. And then one of the things that I'd really like to introduce families to, again, because I feel like we can't completely take away their aguas frescas, right? That's like taking somebody's tortilla away, yeah. And that's also not, in my opinion, that's not realistic. But a sweetener that I really like to introduce families to is stevia. So I don't know if you use it or if you've ever.
I'm not very knowledgeable about stevia per se. I mostly try and get because so many of the artificial sweeteners that are in the commercial things that people are drinking are not necessarily good for growing minds and bodies and that kind of thing. So I don't personally know a lot about stevia. So but I do mostly try and steer my parents away from artificial sweeteners and steer them more towards water. Mm-hmm. But when I usually talk to my parents, I recommend like fruit infusions and that kind of thing for my drinks.
Absolutely, yeah. Fruit infusions, bringing in that natural sweetener, really watering down if they are having any type of juice, really watering that down to get a little bit of sweetness. But frozen fruits, we have in our frozen section, we've got a lot of really great options to be throwing into your water bottles. What I love introducing families to is just putting frozen blueberries in your water bottle. It colors the water to, if it would look like Kool-Aid to them, and it's juice. And to a toddler, color is everything. That visual acceptance is that first step, and then making sure that their palate isn't getting used to what that sweetness is, but their palate's getting used to more of those minerals and vitamins. That's what I see most often in what's lacking right now in our kiddos is the non-exposure to minerals and vitamins. So that when you bring in these fruits and these vegetables and they have these flavors in their mouth, they're not familiar with them. And it's kind of like No, I prefer sugar. I want the sugar. I don't want the mineral vitamin. And so exposure to the fruits and vegetables on a daily basis is so important to get acceptance for those very, essential nutrients. But putting blueberries in water and making it look like Kool-Aid is one of those first steps to be able to say, oh, that looks like juice. I'm gonna drink that. The other thing I really encourage families to do is put it in the refrigerator. I know this might not be appealing. Bottled water may not be appealing, especially, if it's warm or a little bit warmer than room temperature. But cold water is much more enjoyable too. So always encouraging to have that available as well. The other thing that I think is really important is leading by example.
Yes.
So I see this a lot. And in fact, when I'm talking with our patients and our parents, I hear a lot of parents say, well, we buy soda, but this is for my husband.
Right.
And the kids know that they shouldn't be drinking it. Well, that is not leading by example, number one. It's also giving them this taboo of, oh, that's something I can't have. So when I do have it, I want a lot of it. And so again, it's really making sure that you are leading by example so that you're providing your body what it needs to stay good and healthy, and then also making sure your child is building those good, healthy habits. And so I see that a lot. I don't know if you've ever...
Oh, we totally see it all the time. So I always, whenever I talk to my parents about dietary changes, about their kid, gaining too much weight, I always end it has to be the whole family. You can't just have one person and say that they have to abide by a particular diet. The whole family together. And so many times I'm saying to parents, they're eating this stuff, don't buy it. Don't buy the soda, don't buy the candy. If it's not there, then the kids can't eat it. And it's not fair to say, oh, I can have it and you can't have it. And I definitely say that all of the time.
Yeah, and I understand it too. Again, growing up in my home, there wasn't a lot of fruits and vegetables that were coming through our table. It was very much just, salsa, maybe some tomatoes, pico de gallo, things that are traditional, again, very cultural, but we didn't have a lot of exposure to fruits and vegetables. I could think of apples and oranges, sure, that was there, but again, really trying to get that child to get exposed to more flavors, more different things that'll really make sure that their palate is maturing. It's going to be the exposure to more fruits and vegetables. And that's a great thing about nutrition services and even our team of dietitians. They can speak to a parent in terms of what their lifestyle is and be able to say, all right, well, we're making fideo right now. Let's throw some calabacita in it. Let's throw some more tomatoes. Why don't we saute some extra calabacita on the side, maybe even throw in a fresh roasted corn in there. So these suggestions from our RDs, our dietitians, they really fit for these families, and they understand that it is going to be important for us to start to make this change. Another point I want to make about those, on top of the sugary drinks that our kids are having, is the remainder of the plate, right? And so we're missing our fruits and vegetables. We're getting some proteins. Lots of times they're really high in fat, so that brings up our calorie intake. But then we're getting a ton of grains, and we're getting a ton of refined grains. That means that they've been stripped of their fiber, been stripped of some of their mineral and vitamins, and now we're left with a carbohydrate that acts just like the sugar in a beverage, right? And so I'll give you an example of one of my last interactions. I had a kiddo that was eating 3 waffles every morning. And I wish I was exaggerating about this, but I asked the mom to cut a measure in this, but he was having about 3/4 cup of syrup with it.
Wow.
Yeah. And then to top it off, he was having a glass of orange juice. Now, if we break that down into numbers, that's about 250 grams of carbohydrates a day. So, a meal, right?
Yeah.
So 250 grams of carbohydrates for one meal, when that's way over than what a child should be having. And so this is where we break it down for them and start to say, okay, let's cut back and get a whole grain waffle. Let's put some fresh fruit on there, because now we're bringing in fiber and more of these mineral and vitamins. Let's serve it with a glass of milk, because now we're bringing in another nutrient as well. So again, not saying no waffles, no syrup. Exactly. We're saying let's figure out how to create more balance here. And so that really is an important piece of switching over these folks into good, more balanced eating.
Yeah, and I personally, at our house, we eat the Kodiak waffles. Yes. So the protein-loaded waffles, and then we put peanut butter on them. And so again, you're getting that healthy protein, and but I agree, you want to make substitutions that are healthier. You don't necessarily have to change your diet entirely, but you want to switch to things. And so I do a lot of that too. I tell a lot of parents, don't buy the traditional yogurt, buy Greek yogurt. Greek yogurt has more protein. And there's a lot of healthy changes you can make within what you're normally eating, but you have to look for things that fit that diet, and you talked about that too with like your cultural expectations of what you're eating, and making sure that you can make small tweaks, but it makes a huge change in what you're eating.
Absolutely, absolutely. And so when we go back on stevia, I'd like to really talk
Sure,
a little bit about that, because one of the things is, what we believe too is not taking somebody from 0 to 60, and so really kind of giving them these steps as to making better choices. So stevia can be a good option for families to still get that sweetness. Again, I'm going to go back to the aguas frescas, because we love making lemonade and throwing fresh watermelon in that, fresh strawberries. But stevia is not going to be a chemically changed sweetener, say for like aspartame or some of what we refer to as the red, pink, and yellow, right? We all know those sweeteners that we find at restaurants. But this is going to be coming from a stevia plant, so this is a more natural form. It also isn't chemically changed like an artificial sugar is, and it also does include some sugar alcohols, but I think it's just a great way to transition out of what a really high sugary beverage would be at the 45, 60 gram of carb per serving, versus to maybe a 5 or 10 depending on what it is, what type of stevia you're using. So I like using that as a kind of a stepping stool to making sure that they're getting all of those carbohydrates primarily from fruits and vegetables and whole grain, versus those juices and sodas.
I'll have to look more into that, because I don't know, as I said, I don't know too much about it myself. I do definitely say that, if you have a choice between drinking like a real sugar versus having a artificial sweetener, probably better to stay away from the real sugar. However, water is always going to be the best. Right. And then I also, today and through the last few days, I've had a lot of conversations with parents about the amount of milk that their kids are drinking. Because a lot of parents do know that milk is a healthy drink, but then we start seeing the kids, like some of these kids I've seen recently, drinking 36, 48 ounces of milk. I've even seen kids that are going through a gallon of milk every 2 days. And then I just was wondering, what your recommendations are for everyone that you talk to about how much milk is okay for a kid to be drinking and that kind of stuff.
Sure, yeah, the recommendations for dairy is going to be at least 3 servings a day, and that's going to be including cheeses and yogurts as well. And so we talked to what are some good options. To your point, of course, Greek yogurt is an excellent option. One of the things that we do once a patient comes in is we do a food recall. And this assessment of what they're eating in a full day helps us understand, all right, well, where are they receiving their dairy at? Is it coming in the form of cheese in some cases? In that case, when we would cut back on that serving of milk. And so a half a cup to a cup of milk, depending on the age of the child, is what we would recommend at one sitting. And then just really taking a look. Sometimes it takes looking at it in the bigger picture, right? And being able to say, wow, your child's having 7, 8 servings of milk in a day. And it's also, preventing them from having other forms of protein. So just kind of talking them through what those serving sizes should look like, and paying attention what their child's eating throughout the day, so that we can give them better recommendations too. And I think some parents don't realize that cheese and yogurt, that falls in the dairy category too, and they are receiving those really essential nutrients through that too, so that they're mindful of count those servings too. So at the minimum 3 servings a day. It depends on the child's age, as we would say, okay, let's go ahead and add in an extra dairy because they may not be getting enough protein from something else. So again, this assessment piece with our dietitians is so important to help that family understand what next steps should be taken to create some more balance there.
Well, this is again of the part 1 of our nutrition talk. I'm talking here with our dietitian, Lorena. You can join us for part 2, and that'll be more talk about nutrition.